Now, something that might have been refreshing to you is when Mr. Bill Watts said, "Hey,
Yes.
hey, do you happen to know what a cravat is? Do you happen to know
Yes,
what
so
that is?"
obviously I do, but a cravat is a really serious neck crank, and it hurts a lot if you put it on.
Us American fans may have been first actually exposed to it, with Chris Hero. Chris Hero uses the cravat a lot, as far as I can tell. Is that the same kind of thing where you twist the head and you have the
Well,
hands in there?
they were exposed to it from old British wrestlers that came here, and including me a lot. And our friend of this podcast family, Mr. Shivani, um, used to, because I was doing that in 1993. As soon as I got here, I sort of brought the cravat back. Ag- Traditional European wrestling, and Japanese as well, because New Japan Pro Wrestling was has had European wrestling had a huge influence on that. So a lot of and I know, just the other day actually was it 26 years or something since I debuted in New Japan. Well, my first night was in a tag match with Tuco Scorpio, who's somebody, by the way, who's needs a shout out as being really incredible and ahead of his time. Seems to be a lot of people think everything started in 2000 with a lot of the younger fellas, whereas we were doing it in the early 90s, as
Yeah,
myself and
I
Scorpio and Chris and stuff.
yeah, I
So
guess what I was saying with the cravat is that's the
yeah,
first time I literally heard it called that, like,
right.
as a wrestling fan. Like, we'd seen you do it, but it
Well,
was
no,
something that was called a
well,
cravat.
Gordon Soley used to call it, yes, Gordon knew it, and Mr. Shivani always called it a cravat and put it over. So Chris has done his thing with it and popularized it, but it was always part of, and made a lot out of that, and brought it to a modern audience. Let's just say that, because again, I don't think it's not like I did that. You know, people were
Right.
been doing that forever, and it was the last. There was some of the British wrestlers that came in the 80s didn't do that stuff. So it was the wrestlers from the 70s. I stuck to that style. I could do all kinds of different stuff, but I knew where my strengths lay. My strengths lay. I wanted to do stuff like the cruiserweights do in junior heavyweights, but I just couldn't do it. But I could do the heavyweight style, and I could do the grappling style and what. So that was one of my go-to moves. So, but if you're not used to that, and again, there would have been nobody doing that, or there may have been the fellas that been to Calgary. Bret Hart may have done a cravat. I don't know. There'd been far more people who've seen more of Bret's stuff than me. He could have, because it would have been taught to him, because he's again just a lot of European influence in people who come from Calgary. And knowing anybody that's been through Calgary may have used a cravat a lot, but I was used to using a cravat. Was a big part of my, repertoire. Was just a normal thing for me to go into. I know a lot of things out of that, and suplexes out of that, and all kinds of stuff that I've done over time. Um, but it's a serious neck crank, and I think we've talked before about when I first came here, because I was not only getting told, but I didn't do the normal American style kind of thing. I never had a problem with anybody from the 80s to do any of that, because they were used to adapting to different territories, different countries, and different people's styles. People that were coming along later on weren't exposed to as much. So you had to be careful and I had to figure this out, what I could. Well, I go to try to put that on, and let's just say, I'm not going to explain why, it just didn't quite work out. And I don't blame it. It's because if you're on with somebody who looks like me, and I was a big person. Bob Cook was an incredible, really good at his job, but he wouldn't have been used to having a British wrestler, and especially somebody who looked like me. And, there was it was
What do
a
you mean
myth.
somebody who looked like you?
I'm 6'3". Most people don't know how big I am until they meet me.
Right.
And I'm not, I'm not a bodybuilder, but I look like a wrestler, and I have a, if I go, you probably, if you see me, especially when I was younger, oh, he looks like he could cream me. And the thing is that there was a lot of British wrestlers who came over here in Adrian Street, reveled in the fact that he could, and all the fellas could, and there's lots of stories we can get into at different times where people have tried them out and they get hurt very quickly. If you try messing, we all have a skill. I don't claim to be anything. I don't claim to be from anywhere, but just the style of wrestling alone, you learn how to put certain submissions on that you can do in pro wrestling, but you've only got to add the slightest bit of pressure, and they can hurt somebody very quickly, very easily. Okay, so I don't claim to be anything. I know there's myths about me, and I don't. You never hear me saying those things.
Right.
It's just the style of wrestling that I do. Right. I do know how to apply these things. Everything I was taught, I was learned how to put on properly, and I know how to put them on properly, and I know how to hurt people with them. Right. If I want to, but I don't. That's not my thing. Right. There was plenty of other people from Europe that have done that. Right. So there was always a bit of a myth about, and not a myth because it was the truth about what British wrestlers could do.
Right.
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 So I go to do a thing that Bob wouldn't have been used to because nobody else would have done it. He might not have seen, since the 70s. Because although Chris Adams, Davey Boy Smith, Dynamite Kid all had their own styles, they weren't really doing that British style when they came to America. They'd
Right.
figured their way of fitting into wherever they fit into. But we all learnt that stuff as a young wrestler. We all learnt this stuff. I just continued that whole style because it was different,
Mhm.
and I sometimes stuck to it in my all, not all the time. And I did a lot more strikes as I got more the longer I stayed in America. But I tried to keep because I wanted to keep that style alive because that's what got me to the dance. That's what got me to America, and I felt like I needed to keep that style. And the people who got me here represent the style of British wrestling. That was my things to represent British professional wrestling
S
at its best, at what proper British wrestlers did.
So even though, Bob Cook was a veteran who was really good at his job, is
Yes,
it
very good.
reasonable to assume
He
that he had not
probably
been exposed to that style at
and
that point?
if I'm not some, I'm an 18 stone fella at 6'3". He might have looked at my, or seen me doing. I don't know. I don't know if he saw me doing my squats and my push-ups before I went. I don't know what he saw, but
Well, he might have thought of you as a clothesline guy, right?
right. No, he certainly wouldn't have thought of me as that because the word had, again, just in the afternoon that I got there, and I'm not
Word got
anything.
around.
There's a English fella, and these English fella, Rick Rogers, whoever, these fellas don't, if you know anything about British fellas,
Got it.
they're known for being whatever they are,
Mhm.
right? So I've got all that baggage on me before I even get here. So I'm not like some fella he's going on, and when I lock up with somebody, I lock up with them,
Right.
right? I'm not a play out wrestler, right? That's the whole, there's that's just the way it is. So I would imagine straight away he's thinking, I've got an handful on my hands here, and then I'm trying to put him in an holds that he's not used to. And as soon as you feel that on, and I just go, and that much pressure, I can hurt you very, very badly, right? I use that in pro wrestling as a hold to apply a little bit of pressure
Mhm.
and to use it to tell a story.
But the option is there.
But the option to go
Right.
rumph
Yes.
and
Right.
have you dribbling and getting fed mashed up toast for the rest of your life, if I wish, right? But
Toast.
I right,
Okay.
okay. So that didn't quite feel right to me. Plus, having this weird, again, I've got a million voices going, what's changed? What was good for me from that first weekend, I was booked on every live event. WCW had two shows going on. Bill Watts booked a lot of shows. There was the A Crew, which were doing all arenas, which Sting and was no, Lex wasn't there at the time. Lex came later. But Sting and whoever was there, but Sting was, and oh, sorry, Vader, Sting and Vader, and those guys.
Right, the
And
tag champs at the time
yeah,
probably, and
no, the tag champs
worked the B show.
were Ricky and Shane Douglas.
Right. Steamboat, right.
Ricky Steamboat and Shane Douglas, I believe, and they were on with the Hollywood Blondes, which was Steve Austin and Brian Pillman.
Right.
So we had a hell of a crew. The B crew was an incredible crew of wrestlers. Main event was Steve Austin and Brian Pillman against Ricky Steamboat and Shane Douglas, and Ricky
Wow.
will not get out of that ring until there's at least 30 minutes gone.
Right.
He's getting his cardio in that ring, right? And they were all machines going, go, 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 right? Well, they didn't know what to do with it. I wrestled other people, sometimes Scorpio, which great, because he trained in Japan. So he knew because of the European influence, we knew Japan. He knew a different style. We met great opponents for each other. Brad Armstrong, excellent opponent for me. But the main person, because they didn't know what to do with either of us, they put me on with a lot of the times with Chris.
Mm.
Well, me and him go out and wrestle each other. Although we'd never wrestled each other until then, which was early 1993. There's a tape on YouTube. I think it's my birthday. I think May the 10th of 1993, and it's a fan cam, and you can only see bits of it. Me and him were doing the stuff that we were known for doing later on in 2000 stuff in 1993. We're doing dragon suplexes and the style of stuff that we were doing. We're
Very
doing it in,
physical, very
yes,
physical, right.
completely different to anybody else. Well, Barry Windham was one of the agents. He was on all the shows. He was going back and saying, look, these lads know what they're doing. Ricky Steamboat I've known Ricky a long time. I've never heard him swear. After the first night that he saw me and Chris, he walked up to us, and it was probably coming from him, and being that age was the greatest compliment I've ever had in wrestling. He just came up out of mouth. He went, "You two are some working sons of bitches." He said, "What is that?" And he was asking us, and we were like, "Why is he asking us about doing proper wrist locks?" And
Wow.
because we were doing all these, whereas
Right.
Americans didn't do that at the time. They did that. If you go back, unless you saw Bret
Right.
Hart occasionally do that, or a few of the Calgary guys, but they weren't known for working wrist locks like me. Well, I did.
So
That was one of,
you made a circle with your 4 fingers and your thumb and said that that's how they're
well,
used to
I
doing it,
apply a wrist lock like that.
and you do it with your
Most
thumbs
people do
together,
it like that
right? So
because
you're
they hold an arm and they crank an arm. They don't work a wrist lock.
right,
There's a difference between working an arm, which was Americans do, which is wrestling an arm, and applying a wrist lock. Ric Flair always put on a proper wrist lock. I just assumed for years that because I knew he'd trained with Billy Robinson, and he told me no. He said Dory Funk. I'd watched a lot of Dory Funk before I came to America. I was a big fan of his. He always put on proper wrist locks. I find out Dory Funk told me that his dad used to like British fellas and used to bring him to his territory in Amarillo when he was young.
right.
And so he'd learn that. Because once you learn how to put on a pro, now it's you see everybody doing that. Ricky Steamboat, I've seen and again, it sounds like I'm wrong. I've heard him tell people and lots of people when he was a trainer, this man pointing at me, he changed the whole thing for everybody, the way he put a wrist lock on. Everybody started doing it after that. And still people I see do this, but that's not a thing. I popularized that at that time.
Right. And that's
Okay,
and for
this is
those listening,
93.
it's the difference between having your thumbs flush together and having them
It's
pointed at each other. I'm just
yes,
saying physically what
finger
I'm seeing.
fingers are on the top part of the or well, it's depending where the wrist is, but then you use your thumbs to put the pressure on.
Right. Both thumbs together
Yes, and you
create
well, I don't need
pressure.
to, I can do it with I can do it with one finger and one thumb. I can
Okay.
grab you by any part of your wrist, and I can put you on the floor with
I
one finger and one
I
thumb.
believe you, Mr.
Right.
Regal.
Um, something else that this is part of my training. This is how British wrestlers, why we're all supposed. Nick Bockwinkel has said this, and so I'm not just make Nick Bockwinkel. I've heard him say on interviews. Big. I was very friendly with Big Nick Bockwinkel. There's another guy from pretty much not long after if not when I was there. Again, things happen so quick. But
Yeah, he
Nick
showed up about the
Bockwinkel,
same time in
Nick
NWA,
Bockwinkel
so
was the commissioner. Well, all we did, I used to love watching Nick. I was a huge fan of Nick Bockwinkel. Straight away, me and him connected, and he's talking me through all these incredible matches with Billy Robinson. So I've got, again, another sounding board. Why do I need to listen to anybody else telling me what to do? I'm getting all the best wrestlers in America telling me how to do things, right? Or not to do them. Or if I did anything wrong, they'd say, "Can I have a word with you?" Do you mind? And they weren't screamers and shouters. Again, same kind of people I had in Britain or Europe. Some people were not nice. I, some people, and a lot of them, even if they didn't like me at first, decent enough to explain to me. So they'd, oh, this works. Yeah, oh, I found that this worked with Billy and this worked with Billy. Oh, so he gave me ideas. I've got Nick Bockwinkel telling me what he found worked with what Billy did that got over with the fans and what didn't.
wow.
So you see where this is all going, right?
Absolutely, that's who you listen
So
to.
so me and Chris were doing this stuff, and Ricky's going, wow, this. So that was a lot of what I did, but it still wasn't on TV. Uh, the talking thing, please remind me about this because this is a whole topic about promos. But I didn't feel quite comfortable doing that. Our friend Tony Schiavone was incredibly good to me from the first week, if not the second week. He said, "Come down to the CNN center," and he set a camera up in that's why. If you've got this and you're not working on your promos, because you can film yourself at all times when nobody's there, there's nobody to be embarrassed in front of, you're doing yourself a disservice. Tony, I used to do it in front of the mirror, which is great. I tell people to do it in front of the mirror. Tony set a camera up for me in the CNN center in their offices. And I used to go down on my days off, which were Wednesday, when there was other interviews going on, because I wasn't getting interviewed at first, but there was a little tiny room where they put another camera while everybody else was doing their market specific promos, and which I ended up doing like 100 a day. And that's not an
Right,
exaggeration.
and for newer wrestling fans, they might not know that you would
Yes.
have to go in a room and they'd say, "Okay, Cleveland," and you'd say, "Okay,
Right.
in Cleveland, I'm
Right.
gonna take on Ricky Steamboat, and you
Yes.
got it coming. I'm gonna give you a
Yes.
Cleveland beating," or whatever.
Right. Yes. And do the same ones over and over.
Right.
So I got that's again, it's very easy for me to say these things. I got all these reps, but I can tell you things that did work was Tony got me a camera on the side, and I would be there for a minimum of 8 hours a day. I would be filming them and then watching them because doing it in the mirror is one thing, trying to practice just out loud is another. When you can actually see yourself, which you have no excuse for now that you have a phone, right? You can film yourself and you can see, do I look right? Am I giving myself away in my body language? Am my eyes darting off to the side? Do I need to be focused? You can get instant feedback. Right? If you're having to just do that once a week, right? When we first opened the PC, there was a room put in there, what they called the mirror room, which was a thing where you could go in at any time and press a button and film yourself as much as you wanted, and then go straight out and watch it on a screen. And at first, I thought that was good, and then after a while, I started looking who was going in, and I'm thinking, shouldn't have to be coming in here. I never had to come in here. I did that on my own time. That's just me, right? Not everybody's going to be good at talking, right? But there's no excuse not to be decent at it. No excuse whatsoever not to be decent at it. It's just you're not practicing enough. If you're not, you're just not working at it enough. So if you know you've got to be able to talk, you need to put time of your. If you brush your teeth twice a day, hopefully you do. You've got a mirror in front of you. Put 10 minutes aside and just work on any. It doesn't matter what it is. Just anything. Say the alphabet. It doesn't matter till you find your own voice, and just keep going. So Tony was good enough to do that for me. So very quickly I got to where I could do the voice. I could talk on camera and not feel. And I'd been again. Not going to get into this now. This is a whole separate podcast on just promos. Since I was 19, I'd been really working on my talking skills. But then my first day, not only have I got the nerves of of being there on my first day, whatever I've done, I'm in America now. Um, I knew I didn't answer your question at the beginning of this. You asked me if I wanted to come to America. Once I started seeing American wrestling, yes, I wanted to come to America because I thought that's the going to be the place where everything's going. Once you've seen the production of WWE and WCW, and then I'm wrestling in halls in England with a 100-watt light bulb above the ring.
Look like big time. Right.
And if you're a professional and you're in figures of money, that's where I need to be. Right? I could have, or I wanted to get a full-time gig with New Japan.
Sure.
I didn't really know. I probably, because of my connection to Pete Roberts, I may have ended up in All Japan if I'd have stayed in England. I don't know because me and Pete, we were very good. And Pete Roberts is Stan Hansen's best friend. Once Stan moved over to All Japan, so did Pete. And Pete was on a lot of tours with Stan because they're best friends. But Pete is an incredible wrestler. It wasn't just because he was a friend. Stan wouldn't have put him in. I don't know Stan apart from saying hello a couple of times, but he's not going to kill his own credibility without putting his friend, right? Well, Pete, by the time I was in my 20s, I was getting, this is another story. I'd got offers. It didn't work out for whatever reason. Keep that note. We'll tell that story another day.
Sure.
I ended up going to New Japan when I was in WCW in 1994, which is another thing. Let's keep on today's topic. But Tony Schiavone got me doing that. Within a short period, so they know that I can wrestle now because I'm wrestling Chris or I'm wrestling Scorpio, I'm wrestling whoever I'm wrestling. All the wrestlers are giving them good info on me about what I'm doing on live events or house shows as they were in those days. Oh, this fella, yes, he can really go and he can really wrestle. Well, but it's not matching it on TV, right? I learned another thing is another tip for young wrestlers. Just because most wrestlers won't admit they can't do something, I've learned. I know that. I learned that when I was young. If I can't do something, I'll just go, sorry, I can't do that. Because I was trying to do things, again, because I was listening to the people paying me or the people that were working for the people paying me. Oh, this fella that we know from England used to do this. I used to do a flying ankle scissors. Eddie Guerrero used to do it with me later on because he could do it. And they said, can you do that? And I said, oh, yeah, I can do that. Dave Taylor does it incredibly well. And Steve Wright was the master at it, who was Alex Wright's dad. He was incredible, right? But I could do it. I wasn't as good as them at doing it, but I could do it. But it's a special thing that you need, and you need somebody to take it in a certain way. I'd asked a certain person, I was on TV with them, can you do that? Oh yeah, I can do that. And then I did it and they didn't know how to do it because they'd never seen it. So just because you can doesn't mean you have to. Make sure that's why you should be watching all the matches and not watching your phone when you're at work so you can watch all the wrestlers and know what they can and can't do. So don't ever put your stuff on them that you if you see them and they can't, you know that they're and don't blame them for anything. It's not their fault if they don't know a certain thing. But I've seen that a lot of wrestlers come out and scream at somebody for not knowing something. It's not their fault if they don't know how to do a certain thing.
Right.
Don't take it out on them. It's your fault for trying to do it with them,
And
right? That's part of your studying. That's part of your job as a professional is to watch everything. So you know, John Cena watched everything. So he knew exactly what everybody did and he could put his stuff in with it or around it. That's why he's John Cena, right? All these things, I know I waffle on, but if you listen to them, there's points to everything. That's why. If you're
but it
not watching the matches, as was the case when I came to WCW, there was these what I call 90s wrestlers that had gone, had come through a different time. Every time, if when I was watching wrestling, when I came, when the matches were on, Steve Austin was watching, Brian Pillman was watching. There's a few others that were there at the time, weren't watching. They'd left the building or they were talking about egg whites and tanning,
Mhm.
right? We were watching wrestling. It, we're still about in this job in some form or another, or people remember us for something, right?
Right,
And
absolutely.
then go back and look at who was around in WCW then and see how many of them stayed in this job for any length of time.
That's it
It's a pretty easy thing to figure out, right? The ones who put the most work in, you don't know if you're ever going to use it, but it's worth knowing because you never know when you're going to need it, right? I know this is
absolutely.
going to be a long podcast today. Let's cut this now because I don't want to ruin people's idea if it's the first time they're listening because we haven't even got
Oh,
past first day one yet.
it's all good, and I think a good closing point for today's episode is the Bob Cook match, like, your
Right,
first match, and, you
right.
talked about just a few minutes ago about how as a wrestler, it's your responsibility to know what someone can't do,
Can or
and
can't do.
and
I shouldn't have tried to do something with him that he wasn't comfortable with.